The German Shepherd stood motionless in the center of Interstate 40, his massive frame creating a wall of fur and determination that brought rushing traffic to a grinding halt. Cars swerved, horns blared, but Rex didn't flinch. Dr. Sarah Bennett slammed the ambulance brakes, her heart hammering against her ribs. In 23 years of emergency medicine, she'd never seen anything like this. The dog's amber eyes locked onto hers through the windshield, not wild or panicked, but purposeful, intelligent, desperate. "Move him!" her partner shouted, reaching for the horn again. But Sarah raised her hand. Something in Rex's unwavering stare stopped her cold. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. The dog took one deliberate step toward their vehicle, then another, never breaking eye contact. His massive head tilted slightly, as if asking a question only she could understand. What happened next would challenge everything they thought they knew about loyalty, love, and the invisible bonds that connect us all. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Harold Eugene Mitchell had always believed that a man's worth was measured by his word and his willingness to stand by those who stood by him. At 78, the Vietnam veteran carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and chosen to focus on the best. His weathered hands, marked by decades of honest work as a mechanic, still moved with precision as he prepared his morning coffee in the modest farmhouse outside Asheville, North Carolina. The house felt too big since Martha passed 3 years ago. Every morning, Harold set 2 coffee cups on the kitchen counter, old habits dying harder than hope, before remembering and putting one away. The silence that had once been comfortable companionship now echoed through rooms filled with 47 years of shared memories. Photographs of their life together lined the mantelpiece. Their wedding day, Harold in his Army uniform, Martha's radiant smile at their daughter Jennifer's graduation, grandchildren they'd loved from afar. Rex had arrived 5 years ago, a broken soul from the county shelter scheduled for euthanization. The 8-year-old German Shepherd bore the scars of neglect and abandonment, but Harold recognized something familiar in those amber eyes. The look of a warrior who had lost his purpose. Harold had driven to the shelter that rainy Tuesday morning looking for nothing more than companionship. He left with a best friend. The two formed an unbreakable bond built on mutual understanding. Rex seemed to sense Harold's moods, offering his massive head for comfort during the dark moments when grief threatened to overwhelm. Harold, in turn, provided the stability and love the dog had never known. Their daily routine became sacred: morning coffee and medications, afternoon walks through the wooded trails behind the house, evening conversations on the front porch where Harold would tell Rex stories about Martha, about Vietnam, about the grandchildren who rarely visited. Dr. Sarah Bennett represented everything Harold's generation respected: dedication, competence, and service to others. At 52, she had earned her position as head of emergency medicine at Mission Hospital through sheer determination and skill. Divorced and childless by choice, Sarah had channeled her nurturing instincts into saving lives. Her colleagues knew her as unflappable under pressure, someone who could make life or death decisions with steady hands and a clear mind. What they didn't know was that Sarah drove the ambulance part-time, not for the extra income, but to stay connected to the immediate raw moments where medicine mattered most. Behind the wheel, she wasn't an administrator dealing with insurance companies and hospital politics. She was a healer racing against time, carrying hope to families facing their darkest hours. The rural community outside Asheville was the kind of place where neighbors still checked on each other, where everyone knew everyone's business, and where an old veteran and his loyal dog could live quietly without judgment. It was a place where the pharmacy clerk asked about Harold's arthritis, where the grocery store manager saved the good cuts of meat for longtime customers, and where Pastor Bill Crawford had been delivering the same message of hope and redemption for 37 years. This was Harold and Rex's world, simple, honest, and about to be forever changed. October 15th dawned gray and restless, the kind of autumn morning that carried whispers of winter in its cool breath. Harold woke before his alarm, unusual for a man whose military training had programmed him for precise schedules decades ago. Something felt different, though he couldn't put his finger on what. The coffee tasted bitter, his morning pills stuck in his throat, and even the familiar ritual of checking Martha's photograph on the nightstand brought no comfort. Rex refused his breakfast, the first time in 5 years that the German Shepherd had turned away from food. The dog paced the kitchen restlessly, his amber eyes darting between Harold and the front door with an urgency that made Harold's chest tighten. "What's got into you, boy?" Harold murmured, running his weathered fingers through Rex's thick coat. The dog leaned into his touch but remained agitated, whining softly in a way that raised the hair on Harold's arms. By 2 o'clock, Harold couldn't shake the restlessness that had been building all day. The walls of the farmhouse seemed to press closer with each passing hour, and the October afternoon beckoned through windows that framed the brilliant reds and golds of changing leaves. Against his better judgment and Rex's obvious reluctance, Harold decided on a walk through the woods behind his property. "Come on, Rex. Fresh air will do us both good," Harold said, reaching for his jacket. But Rex planted himself firmly by the door, refusing to move. His massive frame blocked Harold's path, and those intelligent eyes held something Harold had never seen before: fear. Harold had to coax Rex outside with unusual effort, and even then, the dog stayed unnaturally close to his side. They chose a trail Harold had walked countless times, but today he felt drawn deeper into the woods, toward paths less traveled. Rex's reluctance grew with every step, the dog constantly looking back toward the house, occasionally nudging Harold's leg as if trying to turn him around. The forest was unusually quiet. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Harold's thoughts drifted to Martha, to the grandchildren he barely knew, to the loneliness that had become his constant companion. He wondered if this was how his remaining years would unfold: quiet walks with Rex, empty conversations with photographs, and the slow fade of a life once filled with purpose. "You know what I miss most about your grandmother, Martha?" Harold said aloud, his voice echoing strangely in the stillness. Rex's ears perked up at Martha's name. The way she'd hum while cooking Sunday dinner, same tune every week, something her mother used to sing. "I can't remember the words anymore, but I'd give anything to hear that humming one more time." They were nearly 3 miles from the nearest road when Harold first noticed the change in his vision. The autumn colors seemed to shift and blur at the edges, and a strange heaviness settled in his left arm. He stopped walking, attributing the symptoms to exertion, but Rex immediately pressed against his legs, whining with increased urgency. "I'm all right, boy," Harold said, but his voice sounded strange even to his own ears. The words felt thick on his tongue, and when he tried to take another step, his left leg didn't respond quite right. Rex's whining grew louder, more insistent, and the dog began nudging Harold toward a fallen log, as if understanding before Harold did that something was terribly wrong. The world tilted sideways without warning. Harold felt his wedding ring catch the afternoon sunlight as his hand reached out desperately for something, anything to hold on to before the darkness claimed him. His last coherent thought wasn't of fear or regret, but of Rex. "Rex," he whispered as consciousness slipped away. "Get help." Rex stood over Harold's still form for several long minutes, his massive head moving between his fallen master and the distant sound of traffic on Interstate 40. The dog's training had never prepared him for this moment, but something deeper than training, something that transcended species and spoke to the bonds forged through years of mutual devotion, took over. Rex's decision came with surprising clarity. Staying with Harold meant watching him die. Leaving meant abandoning him in his moment of greatest need. But Harold had taught him that sometimes love required the hardest choices. With a final look at his unconscious master, Rex turned toward the distant highway and began to run. The German Shepherd's powerful legs carried him through dense underbrush and across rocky streams with single-minded determination. His breath came in heavy pants, and thorns tore at his coat. But Rex never slowed. Behind him lay everything he loved. Ahead lay Harold's only chance for survival. Time was running out, and Rex was Harold's only hope. Rex's paws thundered against the forest floor as he navigated terrain that would have challenged an experienced hiker. The German Shepherd's military bloodline served him well now. His powerful frame designed for endurance, and his intelligence calculating the fastest route to help. Every fiber of his being screamed to return to Harold, but the deeper wisdom that comes from unconditional love drove him forward. The 3 miles between Harold and Interstate 40 stretched before Rex like an impossible maze of obstacles. Dense thickets caught at his coat, forcing him to zigzag around barriers that would have stopped a smaller dog. A creek, swollen from recent rains, required a dangerous leap that sent him tumbling into the cold water. Rex emerged, shook himself once, and kept running. Time was his enemy now, and every second counted. Doctor. Sarah Bennett was finishing her 3rd emergency call of the day when Rex emerged from the tree line onto Interstate 40. The afternoon had been brutal. A construction accident, an elderly woman's heart attack, and a child's severe allergic reaction had left Sarah's team exhausted and running behind schedule. The radio crackled with another call coming in, and Sarah was mentally preparing for the next crisis when traffic ahead came to a sudden, inexplicable halt. "What's the holdup?" her partner Mike Rodriguez asked, craning his neck to see past the line of stopped vehicles. The ambulance sat motionless in the right lane, emergency lights flashing uselessly in the growing traffic jam. Sarah's trained eye immediately spotted the cause of the delay. A massive German Shepherd stood squarely in the center lane of the interstate, cars swerving around him with honking horns and angry shouts. But something about the dog's posture stopped her from dismissing it as a simple animal control issue. Rex wasn't cowering or running randomly as a panicked dog would. He stood with military precision, his gaze sweeping the stopped vehicles with obvious purpose. "That's not normal behavior," Sarah murmured, watching as Rex ignored the chaos around him. The dog's amber eyes locked onto their ambulance through the windshield, and Sarah felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. In 23 years of emergency medicine, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read situations, and every instinct she possessed was screaming that this was no ordinary traffic incident. Mike reached for the horn, but Sarah caught his wrist. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying the authority that had earned her respect in countless crisis situations. "Look at him, Mike. Really look at him." Rex took one deliberate step toward their ambulance, then another, never breaking eye contact with Sarah. His massive head tilted slightly, and in that gesture Sarah saw something that defied rational explanation: intelligence, desperation, and an almost human plea for understanding. The dog was trying to communicate something urgent, something that transcended the normal barriers between species. Other motorists were growing increasingly agitated. A red pickup truck tried to edge around Rex, but the dog moved precisely to block its path. A sedan attempted the same maneuver from the other side with identical results. Rex was selectively allowing some vehicles to pass while stopping others, and with growing amazement, Sarah realized he was specifically targeting emergency vehicles. "He's choosing us," she whispered, the words sounding impossible even as she spoke them. "He's not just blocking traffic. He's looking for help." Mike shot her a skeptical look. "Sarah, it's a dog, a big confused dog blocking traffic. We need to call animal control and get moving. We've got real emergencies to handle." But Sarah was already opening her door. 23 years of medical training warred with an instinct that ran deeper than education. She had learned to trust her gut in life and death situations, and her gut was telling her that Rex's behavior was far from random. The dog's immediate response to her movement confirmed her suspicions. He stepped toward her eagerly, tail wagging once, briefly, before resuming his urgent stance. "Easy, boy," Sarah said softly, approaching Rex with the same calm confidence she used with panicked patients. "What is it? What do you need?" Rex's response was immediate and unmistakable. He turned away from the highway and looked toward the forest, then back at Sarah, then toward the forest again. The message was clear to anyone willing to listen. "Follow me." When Sarah took a tentative step in his direction, Rex's entire body language changed from desperate urgency to focused determination. "Mike, call dispatch," Sarah said, her decision made. "Tell them we're investigating a possible emergency situation, and call for backup, local sheriff if they're available." "You can't be serious," Mike protested. "We're going to follow a dog into the woods because you think he's trying to tell us something?" "That's exactly what we're going to do," Sarah replied, already reaching for her medical bag. "And hurry. Whatever this is about, I don't think we have much time." Rex seemed to understand that help was coming. He led them to the shoulder of the highway, then paused at the tree line, looking back to ensure they were following. The moment Sarah and Mike reached him, Rex plunged into the forest with renewed purpose, following what appeared to be a non-existent trail through dense undergrowth. The terrain was treacherous, far worse than anything Sarah had expected. Rex moved with the confidence of someone who had traveled this route before, navigating around obstacles and choosing paths that seemed impossible to discern. But what struck Sarah most was the dog's obvious intelligence in adjusting his pace to accommodate the humans following him. When they fell behind, he stopped and waited. When they caught up, he resumed his urgent trek. "This is insane," Mike panted, struggling to keep up. "We're going to get lost out here, and for what? Because a dog led us into the woods?" But Sarah was beginning to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Rex's behavior was too purposeful, too intelligent to dismiss. Somewhere ahead lay an emergency that only this remarkable dog could lead them to, and Sarah was determined to see it through to the end. Rex led them deeper into the forest with unwavering determination, his powerful frame moving through the underbrush as if following an invisible map burned into his memory. Sarah struggled to keep pace, her medical bag bouncing against her hip as she navigated fallen logs and dense thickets. Behind her, Mike's complaints grew more frequent with each passing minute, but Sarah's focus remained locked on the German shepherd ahead. "How much farther?" Mike called out, his voice strained from exertion. "We've been walking for 20 minutes. The radio's losing signal, and we're going to be in serious trouble if we can't find our way back." Sarah checked her watch. 4:15 p.m. They had been following Rex for exactly 18 minutes, covering what felt like miles of difficult terrain. But Rex showed no signs of slowing, and something in his urgency kept her moving forward despite her growing exhaustion. The dog periodically stopped to ensure they were following, his amber eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed almost human. The forest around them was eerily quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Sarah found herself thinking about her father's stories from Vietnam, tales of soldiers who learned to trust their instincts above all else. Those stories had always seemed like romantic exaggerations, but following Rex through the wilderness, she began to understand what her father had meant about bonds that transcended normal understanding. Rex suddenly stopped at the edge of a small clearing, his entire body going rigid. He looked back at Sarah and Mike, then toward a cluster of fallen trees and overgrown brush. His meaning was unmistakable. They had arrived. "Harold!" Sarah called out, though she wasn't sure why that name came to her lips. "Can anyone hear me?" The response was faint, almost lost in the whisper of wind through the trees, but Sarah's trained ear caught it. A weak groan coming from somewhere beyond the fallen timber. She pushed through the underbrush, Rex at her side, until she saw him. Harold Eugene Mitchell lay motionless among the fallen leaves, his face pale and his breathing shallow. Sarah's medical training kicked in immediately as she knelt beside him, checking his pulse and assessing his condition. The signs were unmistakable: stroke, and not a minor one. Harold's left side showed clear signs of paralysis, and his pupils were unequal in size. "Mike, get on the radio now," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced countless medical emergencies. "We need a helicopter if possible, ground transport if not. Stroke patient, approximately 75 to 80 years old, showing signs of major cerebral event. We're going to need GPS coordinates for this location." Mike fumbled with his radio, trying to establish contact with dispatch through the tree cover. "I'm getting static," he reported. "Signal's too weak from here." Sarah was already working, checking Harold's airway and starting her preliminary assessment. Rex had positioned himself at Harold's head, whining softly and gently nuzzling the unconscious man's face. The dog's behavior was heartbreaking to watch. Clearly, this was his master, and Rex understood the gravity of the situation. "How long has he been unconscious?" Sarah asked Rex, the absurdity of the question not lost on her, even in the crisis moment. But Rex's behavior provided clues. The dog was exhausted, but not panicked, suggesting he had found Harold some time ago and made the impossible decision to leave him to seek help. Harold's medical alert bracelet provided crucial information: diabetes, high blood pressure, veteran status, and next-of-kin contact. Sarah memorized the details while continuing her assessment. Harold's condition was critical but stable for the moment, though she knew that could change rapidly with stroke patients. "Got through to dispatch," Mike announced. "Helicopter's 20 minutes out, but they need better coordinates. GPS isn't reading accurately through the tree cover." "Tell them to look for the ambulance on I-40, then follow the emergency flares we're going to set up," Sarah instructed. "And get local sheriff's department out here too. We're going to need help getting him to a landing zone." As if understanding the urgency, Rex suddenly stood and looked toward a different direction than they had come. Sarah followed his gaze and realized the dog was indicating a shorter route, possibly to a clearing suitable for helicopter landing. Rex's intelligence continued to amaze her. Somehow this remarkable animal was still thinking several steps ahead. 25 minutes later, the sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the forest. Rex had led them to a small meadow just half a mile from where Harold lay, and local deputies had arrived to help coordinate the medical evacuation. Harold remained unconscious but stable as they loaded him onto the helicopter, Rex watching every movement with intense focus. "I'm going with him," Sarah announced, climbing into the helicopter. "Mike, take the ambulance back." "Rex!" She paused, looking at the German shepherd who was clearly struggling with whether to follow his master or stay behind. "Rex comes with us." The flight to Mission Hospital took 12 minutes, Rex lying quietly beside Harold's stretcher, his massive head resting gently on his master's arm. Sarah monitored Harold's vital signs while marveling at the dog's calming presence. She had seen therapy animals work with patients before, but never in an emergency medical situation, and never with such obvious emotional connection. At the hospital, Rex became an immediate sensation. Word of the dog who had stopped traffic and led rescuers to his master spread quickly through the medical center. Nurses and orderlies found excuses to visit the emergency department, and even veteran doctors paused to witness the remarkable German shepherd keeping vigil outside Harold's treatment room. Dr. Marcus Webb, the hospital's consulting veterinarian, arrived to examine Rex while Harold underwent emergency treatment. "He's exhausted," Dr. Webb reported to Sarah. "Dehydrated, minor cuts and scratches, but nothing serious. This dog covered some serious ground today. I'd estimate he ran at least 5 miles through difficult terrain." The timeline was staggering. Rex had somehow covered the distance from Harold's location to the interstate, identified the right vehicle to stop, and led them back through terrain that would challenge experienced hikers, all within the critical window for stroke treatment. Without Rex's intervention, Harold would almost certainly have died alone in the forest. News of the rescue spread beyond the hospital. Local television crews arrived, drawn by the human interest story of the heroic dog who saved his master's life. Sarah found herself fielding questions from reporters while trying to focus on Harold's medical care, but she was struck by how the story seemed to resonate with people hungry for something positive in an increasingly complex world. By evening, Harold's condition had stabilized enough for him to regain consciousness briefly. His first word was Rex, spoken with such profound emotion that even the most cynical medical staff members felt their eyes water. Rex was immediately brought to Harold's bedside, and the reunion was everything Sarah had hoped for. Gentle whining from Rex, tears streaming down Harold's face, and a palpable sense of relief that filled the room. But the story was far from over. As Harold drifted back into medically induced rest, Sarah began making calls to locate his family. The emergency contact information led her to Jennifer Mitchell Thompson in Charlotte, Harold's daughter who hadn't spoken to her father in over a year. "You're telling me he was found in the woods?" Jennifer's voice carried a mixture of concern and frustration. "I've been begging him to move into assisted living. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Mrs. Thompson, your father is stable now, but he's going to need significant rehabilitation. More importantly, the dog that saved his life, Rex, seems to be an integral part of his support system. We're seeing remarkable therapeutic responses when they're together." "That dog," Jennifer said with evident irritation. "Dad cares more about that animal than he does about his own safety. If Rex hadn't been with him, maybe Dad wouldn't have been wandering around in the woods in the first place." The conversation revealed a deeper family conflict that Sarah was only beginning to understand. Harold's independence, symbolized by his relationship with Rex, had become a source of tension with his daughter, who saw both the man and the dog as stubborn obstacles to practical care solutions. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself drawn back to Harold's room repeatedly. Rex had been allowed to stay, despite hospital regulations, a decision that Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the chief of staff, had made personally after witnessing the dog's obvious therapeutic value. Harold's vital signs were measurably better when Rex was present, and his brief periods of consciousness were more coherent when the dog was at his bedside. The medical mystery deepened when Sarah discovered Harold's military records in his wallet. Purple Heart recipient, decorated Vietnam veteran, served with distinction in a unit that included search and rescue operations. The parallel between Harold's past as a rescuer and Rex's present role as a lifesaver wasn't lost on her, though she couldn't quite articulate the connection she sensed. Late that night, as Sarah finally prepared to go home, she found Rex still maintaining his vigil outside Harold's room. The German Shepherd had accepted water and a small amount of food from the nursing staff, but he refused to leave his post. Hospital security had given up trying to enforce the no pets policy, and Rex had effectively become a temporary member of the medical team. "You're something special, aren't you?" Sarah whispered to Rex, kneeling down to stroke his massive head. Rex's amber eyes met hers with an intelligence that continued to astound her. In those eyes she saw devotion, exhaustion, worry, and something else. A depth of understanding that seemed to transcend normal animal behavior. As Sarah drove home through the quiet streets of Asheville, She couldn't shake the feeling that she had witnessed something extraordinary. Harold's rescue was medically significant, but the bond between man and dog represented something deeper, a connection that challenged everything she thought she understood about loyalty, intelligence, and the mysterious forces that sometimes bring help exactly when it's needed most. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Harold began his recovery, but tonight, Sarah was content to marvel at the miracle she had witnessed. A dog's love so profound it had moved mountains, or at least stopped traffic and led strangers through a forest to save a life. 3 days after Harold's rescue, Mission Hospital had become the unlikely stage for a drama that captured the attention of the entire region. Harold's recovery exceeded all medical expectations. But it was the presence of Rex that turned a routine stroke rehabilitation into something extraordinary. The German Shepherd had been granted unprecedented access to the hospital, sleeping on a makeshift bed beside Harold's room and accompanying him to physical therapy sessions. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the Chief of Staff, found herself defending decisions that challenged decades of hospital policy. "In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like the therapeutic response we're witnessing," she explained to the hospital board during an emergency meeting. "Mr. Mitchell's progress is remarkable, and every metric we can measure improves dramatically when Rex is present." The controversy deepened when Jennifer Mitchell Thompson arrived from Charlotte, her Mercedes sedan out of place in the hospital's modest parking lot. At 45, Jennifer carried herself with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to having her way, her designer suit and perfectly styled hair a stark contrast to the rural hospital's understated atmosphere. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Jennifer announced to Sarah during their first meeting. "My father is recovering from a major stroke, and you're telling me hospital policy is being changed because of a dog? Rex is the reason Dad was in those woods in the first place. If he'd been in proper assisted care where he belongs, none of this would have happened." Sarah found herself in the uncomfortable position of defending both Harold's autonomy and Rex's therapeutic value. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand your concerns, but the medical evidence is overwhelming. Your father's recovery rate is unprecedented for someone his age and condition. Rex isn't just a pet. He's functioning as a highly effective therapy animal." The tension between mother and daughter perspectives became evident when Jennifer's own children, 12-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Michael, met Rex for the first time. Their immediate fascination with the German Shepherd contrasted sharply with their mother's skepticism. "Grandpa Harold told us about Rex in his letters," Emma said, kneeling beside the massive dog. "He said Rex was the smartest dog in the whole world, but we thought he was just being a grandpa." Michael, initially cautious, warmed to Rex quickly when the dog gently nudged a dropped toy back toward him. "Mom, look how he knows what I want. Grandpa was right. Rex really is special." Jennifer watched her children's interaction with growing frustration. "Emma, Michael, step away from the dog. We don't know his temperament, and Grandpa Harold isn't thinking clearly right now." But Harold was thinking more clearly than anyone realized. During his physical therapy sessions, Rex positioned himself strategically to provide emotional support and physical stability. When Harold struggled with balance exercises, Rex offered his sturdy frame as a brace. When frustration mounted during speech therapy, Rex's presence had a measurable calming effect. "It's unprecedented," admitted Dr. James Morrison, Harold's physical therapist. "I've worked with stroke patients for 15 years, and I've never seen motivation like this. Mr. Mitchell pushes himself harder when Rex is watching, as if he doesn't want to disappoint the dog." The medical team's enthusiasm was matched by growing media attention. National news networks picked up the story of the heroic dog who stopped an ambulance to save his master, and Harold's room became a gathering place for well-wishers, reporters, and curious medical professionals. Rex handled the attention with remarkable composure, seeming to understand his role as both guardian and ambassador. Pastor Bill Crawford, Harold's longtime friend, became a daily visitor and unofficial mediator between Harold and Jennifer. At 65, Bill had known Harold since before Vietnam and had officiated at Martha's funeral. His presence brought a calming influence to family discussions that threatened to become heated arguments. "Jennifer, your father has been through more challenges than most men could handle," Pastor Crawford said gently during one particularly tense conversation. "He survived Vietnam, built a successful business, raised a beautiful daughter, and cared for your mother through her final illness. Rex isn't taking anything away from that legacy. He's helping Harold continue it." Jennifer's frustration was rooted in genuine concern, but it was complicated by years of misunderstanding. "Pastor Crawford, I appreciate everything Dad has accomplished, but he's 78 years old and just had a major stroke. He needs professional care, not the responsibility of a large dog. What happens the next time something goes wrong and Rex can't save him?" The question hung in the air because everyone knew it was valid. Rex's heroic rescue had been extraordinary, but it couldn't be counted on as a sustainable care plan. The medical team began developing a comprehensive rehabilitation program that would need to address both Harold's physical recovery and his living situation. Dr. Sarah Bennett found herself increasingly invested in Harold's case, spending more time in his room than medical protocol strictly required. Something about the elderly veteran reminded her of her own father, though she couldn't quite identify the connection. Harold's stories about Vietnam carried familiar cadences, and his values seemed to echo conversations from her childhood. "You served with the 1st Cavalry Division?" Sarah asked during one of Harold's more alert moments. "Echo Company, Search and Rescue," Harold replied, his speech still slightly slurred but improving daily. "We pulled a lot of good men out of bad places. Lost some too." His eyes grew distant with memory. "Funny thing about rescue work. Sometimes you save someone, sometimes they save you, and sometimes it's impossible to tell the difference." Rex's behavior during these conversations was remarkable. The dog seemed to sense when Harold was becoming emotional or fatigued, positioning himself to provide comfort without being intrusive. Medical staff noted that Harold's blood pressure and heart rate remained stable during even difficult discussions when Rex was present. The financial reality of Harold's situation became clear as the hospital's social services team conducted their assessment. Harold's modest veteran's pension and Social Security provided enough for basic living expenses but would be strained by extended medical care. His farmhouse, while paid for, needed modifications to accommodate his post-stroke limitations. "The insurance will cover acute care and basic rehabilitation," explained Maria Santos, the hospital's social worker. "But long-term care options are limited. Assisted living facilities don't typically allow large dogs, and in-home care is expensive." Jennifer saw this as validation of her position. "This is exactly what I've been trying to tell Dad for months. He needs to sell the house and move into a proper facility where he can get the care he needs." But Harold's response was unwavering. "I'm not leaving Rex, and I'm not selling Martha's house. We'll figure out another way." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for an unexpected development. Local veterans organizations, inspired by Harold's story and Rex's heroism, began organizing support. The American Legion Post, where Harold had been a member for 40 years, launched a fundraising campaign for home modifications and care assistance. "Harold Mitchell represents the best of our generation," declared Commander Robert Stevens at a packed meeting of local veterans. "He served his country with honor, and now his dog has shown the same kind of courage and loyalty. We don't abandon our own." The community response expanded beyond veterans groups. Local businesses donated materials and labor for home modifications. The Regional Therapy Animal Organization offered training to formally certify Rex as a therapeutic companion. Even the county hospital system began exploring policies that would allow therapy animals in rehabilitation programs. Dr. Marcus Webb's examination of Rex revealed the dog to be in excellent health for his age, with remarkable intelligence and emotional stability. "This isn't just a pet who got lucky," Dr. Webb explained to the growing circle of professionals studying the case. "Rex demonstrates problem-solving abilities and emotional intelligence that suggest specific breeding for working roles. His behavior during the rescue was consistent with military or search and rescue training." The mystery of Rex's background became another element in the growing legend. Shelter records were incomplete, but what little information existed suggested Rex had been abandoned by owners who could no longer care for him. The dog's obvious training and intelligence raised questions about his past that Harold was eager to explore once his recovery progressed. Meanwhile, Harold's progress continued to astound his medical team. Within a week of the rescue, he was walking with minimal assistance, his speech had improved dramatically, and his cognitive function showed no signs of permanent damage. The combination of excellent emergency care, intensive rehabilitation, and Rex's therapeutic presence had produced results that challenged conventional expectations for stroke recovery in elderly patients. "We're looking at a textbook case for animal-assisted therapy," Dr. Hoffman noted during a staff meeting. "Mr. Mitchell's recovery metrics are extraordinary, and the correlation with Rex's presence is undeniable. This could change how we approach rehabilitation medicine." But success brought new pressures. Medical researchers wanted to study Harold and Rex's relationship. Documentary filmmakers requested access. Therapy animal organizations sought to understand Rex's training and abilities. Harold, still weak from his ordeal, found the attention overwhelming. "All I want is to go home with Rex and live quietly," Harold told Sarah during one of their conversations. "I appreciate what people are trying to do, but I'm not a specimen to be studied. Rex isn't either. We're just an old man and his dog who want to be left in peace." Sarah understood Harold's desire for privacy, but she also recognized the broader implications of his story. The bond between Harold and Rex represented something profound about healing, loyalty, and the connections that sustain us through life's most difficult challenges. As Harold's primary physician, she was determined to protect both his privacy and his remarkable relationship with Rex, even as the world demanded answers to questions that might not have any. 2 weeks into Harold's recovery, just as hope was beginning to overshadow fear, Rex collapsed during one of their routine physical therapy sessions. The German Shepherd had been walking alongside Harold, providing his usual steady support, when his powerful legs suddenly gave out. Rex fell heavily to the therapy room floor, his breathing labored and his amber eyes clouded with confusion. "Get Dr. Webb immediately," Sarah commanded, rushing to Rex's side while Harold called out frantically from his wheelchair. The scene was heartbreaking. Harold's newly regained strength seemed to drain from his body as he watched his beloved companion struggle. Dr. Webb's examination revealed the devastating truth that would shatter the fragile hope surrounding Harold's recovery. Rex was suffering from an aggressive form of bone cancer that had been silently progressing for months. The veterinarian's face was grim as he delivered the diagnosis to Harold, Sarah, and Jennifer in the hospital conference room. "The cancer is advanced," Dr. Webb explained, his voice gentle but unflinching. "Rex has been living with significant pain for some time, which makes his behavior during your rescue even more remarkable, Harold. Most dogs would have been incapacitated by this stage of the disease." Harold's face crumpled as the implications sank in. Rex had been dying even as he ran 3 miles through the forest to save Harold's life. The dog's heroic actions took on a new, almost unbearable poignancy. Rex had used perhaps his last reserves of strength not for himself, but for his master. "How long?" Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Without aggressive treatment, perhaps a few weeks," Dr. Webb replied. "With chemotherapy and pain management, we might extend that to a few months, but the prognosis isn't good." And given Rex's age and the advanced nature of the cancer, the treatments would be difficult for him to endure. Jennifer saw an opportunity in the tragedy. "Dad, this changes everything. Rex needs specialized care that you can't provide at home, and you need to focus on your own recovery without worrying about a sick dog. Maybe it's time to consider that Rex has lived a good life and—" "No!" Harold's voice carried a steel that silenced the room. "Rex saved my life when he was dying. I'm not abandoning him now when he needs me most." The ethical dilemma that followed exposed deep fractures in Harold's family and challenged everyone involved in his care. Jennifer argued passionately that Harold's limited financial resources should be focused on his own rehabilitation and long-term care. The cost of Rex's cancer treatment could easily consume Harold's modest savings, leaving him dependent on others for his basic needs. "Dad, I understand you love Rex, but you're being selfish," Jennifer said during one particularly heated discussion. "What happens to you when the money runs out? What happens to Rex when the cancer gets worse and you can't take care of either of you?" Harold's response revealed the depth of his conviction and the source of his unshakable loyalty. "Jennifer, when your mother was dying, did I calculate the cost of her care? Did I weigh whether loving her was financially practical? Rex gave me 5 years of companionship when I had nothing left to live for. He saved my life in that forest when he was in agony. I won't balance his worth against dollars and cents." The argument fractured the family in ways that went beyond Rex's medical crisis. Emma and Michael, Harold's grandchildren, instinctively sided with their grandfather's loyalty to Rex, while their mother saw only financial irresponsibility and emotional denial. Pastor Crawford found himself mediating between 3 generations of Mitchells, each convinced they knew what was best for Harold. "Sometimes doing the right thing costs more than we can afford," Pastor Crawford observed during one family meeting. "And sometimes not doing the right thing costs more than we can bear. Harold's choice isn't about money, it's about who he is as a man." The community response to Rex's diagnosis was immediate and overwhelming. The fundraising efforts that had begun for Harold's home modifications expanded to include Rex's medical care. Local veterans organizations, animal welfare groups, and ordinary citizens contributed to what became known as the Rex Fund, raising thousands of dollars in just days. But money couldn't solve the deeper problem. Rex was dying, and no amount of treatment could change that fundamental reality. Harold faced the impossible choice between prolonging Rex's life through aggressive medical intervention or allowing his companion to die naturally with dignity and minimal suffering. Sarah found herself drawn deeper into Harold's dilemma, her medical training warring with her growing emotional investment in both patient and dog. She had witnessed Rex's therapeutic effect on Harold's recovery, but she also understood the practical limitations of their situation. Rex's decline was accelerating, and his presence was becoming a source of stress rather than comfort for Harold. "The treatments are harsh," Dr. Webb explained during a consultation about Rex's options. "Chemotherapy will make Rex sick for weeks, and there's no guarantee it will significantly extend his life. We're talking about trading quality time for quantity time, and even that's uncertain." Harold's decision process was agonizing to witness. He spent hours sitting beside Rex's bed in the veterinary wing, talking quietly to the dog about memories, regrets, and the impossible choices that love sometimes demands. Rex, despite his pain, continued to focus his attention on Harold's well-being, struggling to stand whenever Harold appeared distressed. "You know what I should do, don't you, boy?" Harold whispered during one of their conversations. "You always were smarter than me about what really matters." The turning point came when Harold's own health began to deteriorate under the stress of Rex's condition. His blood pressure spiked, his speech became slurred again, and his physical therapy progress stalled. Sarah realized that Harold's emotional distress was threatening his medical recovery, creating a crisis that could undo weeks of progress. "Harold, I need to be direct with you," Sarah said during their next consultation. "Your body is responding to the stress of Rex's illness. Your recovery depends on your emotional stability, and right now, watching Rex suffer is making you sick." Harold's response revealed the tragic irony of their situation. "So you're telling me that loving Rex is going to kill me, just like not having Rex would have killed me in those woods?" Jennifer seized on Sarah's assessment as validation of her position. "This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you, Dad. You're so focused on Rex that you're neglecting your own health. Mom wouldn't want this for you." The mention of Martha sparked something in Harold that had been building for weeks. "Don't you dare tell me what your mother would want," he said, his voice rising with an anger that surprised everyone in the room. Martha loved Rex too. She understood that some things matter more than convenience or money or other people's opinions about what's practical. The family confrontation that followed was brutal in its honesty. Years of unspoken resentments, misunderstandings, and different values erupted in the sterile conference room of Mission Hospital. Jennifer accused Harold of choosing a dog over his own family. Harold accused Jennifer of caring more about inheritance than relationships. Emma and Michael watched their family tear itself apart over questions that had no easy answers. "I don't understand why everyone has to be so mean about Grandpa and Rex," Emma finally said, her young voice cutting through the adult arguments. "They love each other. Isn't that supposed to be good?" The child's innocent questions silenced the room and forced everyone to confront the real issue. Harold and Rex's bond represented something pure in a world that often demanded compromising love for practicality. But that purity came with a cost that was becoming unbearable for everyone involved. Rex's condition worsened daily, and his suffering became increasingly difficult to hide. The dog, who had once radiated strength and intelligence, now struggled with basic movements, his breathing labored and his appetite gone. Harold's vigil beside Rex's bed continued, but it was clearly taking a devastating toll on both man and dog. Dr. Webb finally spoke the words that everyone had been avoiding. "Harold, Rex is telling you he's ready to go. The kindest thing you can do now is let him die with dignity, surrounded by love instead of medical equipment." The decision Harold faced was the hardest any pet owner could imagine, made infinitely more difficult by the extraordinary circumstances of their relationship. Rex had saved Harold's life through an act of supreme loyalty and courage. Now Harold had to save Rex from further suffering through an act of equally difficult love. The tragedy that was unfolding challenged everyone's assumptions about loyalty, love, and the sacrifices that relationships sometimes demand. As Harold prepared to make the most difficult decision of his life, the entire community watched and waited, understanding that they were witnessing something profound about the bonds that define our humanity. The reversal began with a phone call that would change everything Harold thought he knew about his life, his family, and the remarkable dog who had saved him. Sarah was reviewing Rex's latest medical reports when her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize with a Virginia area code. "Dr. Bennett, this is Colonel James Patterson, retired, calling from the Pentagon's military working dog program. I've been following the news about Harold Mitchell and his German Shepherd Rex. I believe I have information that might be relevant to their case." Sarah's pulse quickened as Colonel Patterson continued. "I've been trying to reach Mr. Mitchell directly, but hospital security has been screening his calls. What I have to tell him could change how you're approaching Rex's medical treatment. Dr. Bennett, Rex isn't just any German Shepherd. According to our records, he's the descendant of a military working dog bloodline that has some very special characteristics. The revelation that followed challenged everything Sarah thought she understood about Rex's remarkable intelligence and loyalty. Colonel Patterson explained that Rex's lineage could be traced back to a legendary military working dog program from the Vietnam era, specifically to dogs that had served with Harold's own unit during the war. "We've been tracking the bloodlines of exceptional military working dogs for decades," Colonel Patterson explained. Rex's great-grandfather was a dog named King, who served with Echo Company, 1st Cavalry Division in 1968, the same unit where Harold Mitchell served as a search and rescue specialist. Sarah felt her breath catch as the implications became clear. "Are you saying Harold and Rex's great-grandfather served together in Vietnam?" "More than that," Colonel Patterson replied. "According to the unit records I've reviewed, Harold Mitchell personally saved King's life during a rescue mission near Da Nang. King had been wounded by shrapnel, and Mitchell carried him out of the jungle under enemy fire. King survived, was medically retired, and eventually bred before his death in 1972. The impossible connection between Harold and Rex suddenly made sense in ways that transcended coincidence. Rex's instinctive understanding of Harold's needs, his remarkable intelligence, and his heroic rescue behavior weren't just the actions of a loyal pet. They were the genetic and spiritual legacy of a debt that had been repaid across generations. Sarah immediately called Harold's room, but the conversation she had with him revealed an even more stunning truth. Harold's voice trembled as he listened to the information about King and the bloodline connection to Rex. "King," Harold whispered, and Sarah could hear the emotion building in his voice. "I remember King. Beautiful German shepherd, smart as any soldier in our unit. He saved more lives than any of us could count. I carried him out of that jungle because he'd earned it a dozen times over." But Harold's next words revealed a secret he had carried for 55 years. "Dr. Bennett, there's something else. Something I never told anyone, not even Martha. King was pregnant when I saved her. King was a female, and the military records got it wrong. She gave birth to 3 puppies at the base veterinary station before she was shipped back to the States." The revelation transformed the already extraordinary story into something that seemed to defy rational explanation. Rex wasn't just connected to Harold through bloodline. He was the direct descendant of a dog Harold had saved, and that dog had been carrying the next generation of that remarkable lineage when Harold carried her to safety. Sarah's hands shook as she called Colonel Patterson back with Harold's correction. The military records were quickly re-examined, and the truth emerged. King had indeed been a female, and the administrative error in the original reports had persisted for decades. More importantly, the military's breeding program had traced some of its most successful working dogs back to King's offspring. "This changes everything," Colonel Patterson said during a hastily arranged conference call with Harold, Sarah, and Dr. Webb. "If Rex carries King's genetic legacy, he may have inherited more than just intelligence and loyalty. Some of King's bloodline showed remarkable resilience to certain medical conditions, including cancers that typically affect German shepherds." Dr. Webb's voice was skeptical, but intrigued. "Colonel, are you suggesting that Rex's cancer might respond differently to treatment because of his genetics?" "I'm suggesting that the military has been tracking this bloodline for good reason," Colonel Patterson replied. "King's descendants have shown unusual longevity and resistance to genetic diseases that normally plague the breed. We've had dogs from this line live well into their teens, some surviving cancers that would have been fatal in other dogs." The medical implications were staggering, but the emotional impact on Harold was even more profound. The dog he had rescued 55 years ago in Vietnam had somehow sent her great-grandson to rescue him in return. The circular nature of their connection seemed to suggest forces at work beyond mere coincidence. Jennifer's reaction to the revelation was complex and conflicted. The discovery that Rex represented a tangible connection to her father's military service, a part of his life she had never fully understood, forced her to reconsider her opposition to Harold's devotion to the dog. "I don't understand," Jennifer said during an emotional family meeting. "Are you telling me that Rex is connected to Dad's time in Vietnam? That this isn't just about a pet, but about something that happened in the war?" Harold's explanation, delivered with tears streaming down his weathered face, revealed depths of his military experience that he had never shared with his family. "Jennifer, your mother knew pieces of this, but I never told her everything. I never told anyone everything. In Vietnam, you did what you had to do to bring everyone home. King saved more soldiers than any human in our unit. She had a gift for finding wounded men in impossible places." The parallel between King's rescue abilities and Rex's heroic behavior became impossible to ignore. Both dogs had demonstrated exceptional intelligence, unwavering loyalty, and an almost supernatural ability to navigate dangerous terrain to save human lives. The genetic connection suggested that these traits weren't just learned behavior, but inherited characteristics passed down through generations. Colonel Patterson's next revelation provided hope where there had been only despair. The military has been developing specialized treatments for working dogs with cancer, particularly for dogs from significant bloodlines like King's. I can arrange for Rex to be evaluated at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where they have access to experimental treatments not available in civilian veterinary medicine. The offer represented more than just medical treatment. It was acknowledgement of Rex's place in military history and Harold's service to his country. For the first time since Rex's diagnosis, Harold allowed himself to hope that his companion might survive. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As Colonel Patterson prepared to arrange Rex's transfer to Walter Reed, he mentioned a detail that stopped everyone cold. "Mr. Mitchell, I should mention that the veterinarian who will be overseeing Rex's treatment is Dr. Elizabeth Bennett Morrison. She's one of the leading experts in military working dog medicine." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Did you say Bennett Morrison?" "Yes. Why? Do you know her?" Sarah's voice was barely audible as she replied, "Colonel Patterson, what was Dr. Bennett Morrison's maiden name?" "Bennett, I believe. Elizabeth Bennett before she married. She's actually the daughter of a Vietnam veteran who served with the 1st Cavalry Division. Her father spoke often about his military service and a soldier named Harry Mitchell who saved his life." The final piece of the impossible puzzle fell into place. Sarah's father, who had died 10 years earlier, had been saved by Harold during the same mission where Harold rescued King. The stories Sarah had heard throughout her childhood about the brave soldier who had carried wounded men to safety weren't just war stories, they were about Harold Mitchell. "Harold," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "My father was Thomas Bennett." Tommy Bennett from Echo Company. Harold's face went white as memory flooded back. Tommy Bennett, sweet kid from Georgia, couldn't have been more than 19. Took shrapnel in his legs during a mortar attack near Da Nang. I carried him and King out of that jungle on the same day. The revelation that Sarah was the daughter of a soldier Harold had saved 55 years ago completed a circle that seemed too perfect to be coincidental. 3 generations of life-saving connections. Harold saving Tommy Bennett and King in Vietnam, King's great-grandson Rex saving Harold in North Carolina, and Tommy's daughter Sarah providing the medical care that would help both Harold and Rex recover. Jennifer watched the emotional reunion between her father and Sarah with growing understanding. The bonds that connected Harold to Rex and now to Sarah weren't just sentimental attachments. They were part of a legacy of service, sacrifice, and mutual rescue that spanned decades and species. "This is why you couldn't give up on Rex," Jennifer said quietly, finally understanding her father's unwavering devotion. It wasn't just about a pet. It was about honoring a debt that goes back to the war. Harold nodded, unable to speak, as the weight of 55 years of connection settled over him. Rex, lying quietly in his hospital bed, seemed to sense the significance of the moment, his amber eyes moving between Harold and Sarah with an intelligence that no longer seemed surprising. The truth had revealed itself in ways none of them could have imagined, transforming a simple story of a man and his dog into an epic of loyalty, sacrifice, and the mysterious forces that connect lives across time and species. Rex's rescue of Harold was no longer just an act of canine devotion. It was the completion of a circle that had begun in the jungles of Vietnam 55 years earlier. Christmas Eve arrived with the gentle snowfall that North Carolina rarely sees, transforming Harold's modest farmhouse into something from a holiday card. For the first time in 3 years since Martha's death, the windows glowed with warm light, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled rooms that had been silent for too long. Harold stood at his kitchen window, watching Rex play in the snow with his grandchildren, Emma and Michael, their laughter echoing across the quiet valley. 3 months had passed since that terrible day when Rex collapsed in the hospital, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The experimental treatment at Walter Reed Army Medical Center had exceeded everyone's expectations. Rex's cancer was in remission, his strength had returned, and his amber eyes once again sparkled with the intelligence and joy that had made him Harold's perfect companion. "Grandpa, Rex caught another snowball," Emma called from the yard, her cheeks red with cold and excitement. "He's trying to eat them." Harold smiled, remembering how certain he had been that he would never see Rex play again. The dog's recovery had been gradual but steady, each week bringing new signs of vitality. The military veterinarians at Walter Reed had been amazed by Rex's response to treatment, confirming Colonel Patterson's belief that King's bloodline carried special resilience. Jennifer emerged from the dining room, carrying a platter of Martha's famous Christmas cookies, the recipe Harold had taught her during their reconciliation. The months of crisis had transformed their relationship, breaking down years of misunderstanding and resentment. Jennifer now visited every weekend, bringing the grandchildren Harold had barely known, rebuilding bridges that had seemed permanently burned. "Dad, Sarah just called," Jennifer said, setting the cookies on the kitchen counter. "She and Dr. Elizabeth will be here in an hour." She sounded excited about something, but wouldn't say what. The relationship between Harold and Sarah had deepened into something approaching family. Discovering that her father was Tommy Bennett, the young soldier Harold had saved in Vietnam, had created a bond that transcended the normal doctor-patient relationship. Sarah had become a regular visitor to the farmhouse, bringing medical expertise and emotional support that helped Harold navigate his recovery. Dr. Elizabeth Bennett Morrison, Sarah's cousin and Rex's veterinarian at Walter Reed, had become another regular visitor. The coincidences that had brought them all together still amazed everyone involved, but Elizabeth's scientific mind preferred to focus on the remarkable medical outcomes rather than the mystical implications of their connections. Pastor Bill Crawford arrived first, stamping snow from his boots and carrying a bag of gifts for the grandchildren. At 65, Bill had officiated at more Christmas celebrations than he could count. But he later said that this particular gathering felt touched by something special, a sense of completion and gratitude that filled the farmhouse with almost tangible warmth. "Harold, I've been thinking about the sermon I'm giving tomorrow," Pastor Crawford said, settling into Martha's favorite chair near the fireplace, "about miracles that come disguised as ordinary moments, about how sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what we really have." Harold nodded, understanding exactly what Bill meant. The stroke that could have killed him had instead led to discoveries that enriched his life beyond anything he could have imagined. Rex's illness had brought his family back together. The revelation of their connected histories had created new relationships that felt like found family. When Sarah and Elizabeth arrived together, their excitement was immediately apparent. Elizabeth carried a thick folder of documents, and Sarah's smile suggested news that she could barely contain. "We have something to tell you," Sarah announced as the family gathered in the living room. Rex positioned himself at Harold's feet, somehow sensing that this moment was important. "Elizabeth has been researching King's bloodline more thoroughly, and we've made some incredible discoveries." Elizabeth opened her folder and spread several documents on the coffee table. "Harold, King didn't just have 3 puppies. Our records were incomplete. She had 5 puppies, and we've been able to trace the lineage of all of them. Rex isn't just connected to King, he's part of a remarkable legacy." The documents revealed that King's offspring had been placed with military families across the country, and their descendants had been quietly making their mark for decades. Several had become search and rescue dogs, others had served as therapy animals, and one had even helped establish the military's modern working dog program. "But here's the most amazing part," Elizabeth continued. "We found records of King's training and service that were classified until last year. Harold, King wasn't just any working dog. She was part of an experimental program that paired dogs with specific soldiers based on psychological compatibility. King was specifically trained to work with you." Harold's hands trembled as he absorbed this information. "Are you saying King was assigned to me personally?" "More than that," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. "The military records show that King was selected for your unit because of your background in search and rescue. But there's something else. King was pregnant when she was deployed to Vietnam. The military didn't know it at the time." Elizabeth picked up the story. "King's pregnancy was discovered after you saved her life. The stress of combat and her injury could have caused her to lose the puppies, but your quick action and the care she received saved not just King, but her entire bloodline. Rex exists because you saved his great-grandmother." The circular nature of their story became even more profound as Elizabeth revealed the final piece of information. "Harold, King lived to be 16 years old, exceptional for a German Shepherd. She died peacefully in 1984, but not before her handler wrote a letter about her that was filed with her service records." Elizabeth handed Harold a photocopy of a handwritten letter dated 1984. Harold's eyes filled with tears as he read the words written by King's final handler. "King never forgot the soldier who saved her life in Vietnam. She would become agitated whenever she heard the name Harry or Harold, as if she was still looking for the man who carried her to safety." Her loyalty to that unknown soldier was legendary among everyone who worked with her. Jennifer watched her father's emotional response with new understanding. "King remembered you, Dad. Even after all those years, she remembered." The letter continued with details about King's offspring and their remarkable abilities. Each generation had produced dogs with exceptional intelligence, loyalty, and an almost supernatural ability to form bonds with humans who needed them most. Rex wasn't just lucky to have found Harold. He was genetically programmed to seek out and protect someone exactly like his master. Emma and Michael, who had been listening quietly, seemed to grasp the significance before the adults did. "So Rex and Grandpa were meant to be together?" Emma asked. "Like it was planned somehow?" Elizabeth smiled at the child's innocent wisdom. "Emma, that's exactly right. Sometimes science and destiny work together in ways we can't fully explain." As the evening progressed, the extended family shared stories, memories, and dreams for the future. Harold spoke about his plans to volunteer with the local veterans organization, using his experience with Rex to help other veterans find companion animals. Sarah announced her decision to specialize in integrative medicine, combining traditional medical practice with animal-assisted therapy. Jennifer surprised everyone by revealing her own plans. "I've been thinking about moving back to North Carolina," she said quietly. "The kids love it here, and I've realized that Dad doesn't need someone to take care of him. He needs family to share his life with." The financial concerns that had once seemed insurmountable had been resolved through the community's continued support and Harold's growing role as an advocate for veterans and therapy animals. The Rex Fund had grown into a foundation that helped provide medical care for service animals and their veteran owners. Rex's recovery had exceeded all expectations, but more importantly, it had catalyzed healing throughout the extended family. The dog who had stopped an ambulance on Interstate 40 had done more than save Harold's life. He had restored connections that had been broken for years. As the evening wound down, Harold found himself standing in the same spot where he had collapsed 3 months earlier. The forest beyond his property line was now familiar territory again, marked with trails he and Rex explored daily. But tonight, Harold wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. "You know what the best part is?" Harold said to Sarah as they watched Rex gentle play with the children. "I spent so many years thinking I was saving things, soldiers in Vietnam, stray dogs, my marriage when Martha was sick. But it turns out they were all saving me." Sarah nodded, understanding the profound truth in Harold's words. "Maybe that's how it's supposed to work, Harold. Maybe we're all here to save each other." As the family prepared to leave for midnight service at Pastor Crawford's church, Harold knelt beside Rex and whispered words of gratitude that no one else could hear. The German shepherd's amber eyes reflected the Christmas lights from the tree, and in that moment, Harold understood that some gifts come wrapped in ordinary moments, delivered by four-legged angels who teach us that love is always worth the risk. The snow continued falling as they walked toward the church, Rex trotting beside Harold with the confidence of a dog who knew exactly where he belonged. Behind them, the farmhouse glowed with warmth and welcome, no longer a monument to loss, but a celebration of connections that transcend understanding and endure beyond explanation. When Harold Mitchell collapsed alone in those North Carolina woods, he thought his story was ending. At 78, this Vietnam veteran had already buried his beloved wife Martha and felt the crushing weight of loneliness that so many of us know too well. But Rex, his loyal German shepherd, refused to let that be the final chapter. What happened next proves that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as ordinary moments, a dog's unwavering devotion, a community's rallying support, and the discovery that we're never truly alone when love guides our path. Harold's journey reminds us that our later years aren't about winding down. They're about discovering connections we never knew existed. His reconciliation with his estranged daughter Jennifer, his newfound friendship with Dr. Sarah Bennett, and Rex's miraculous recovery all happened because one loyal companion refused to give up. Their story shows us that loyalty, courage, and love can transform the most desperate circumstances into unexpected joy. In our golden years, we often feel invisible or forgotten, but Harold and Rex prove that our most meaningful chapters may still be unwritten. Sometimes, the very thing we think is holding us back, like Harold's stubborn devotion to Rex, becomes the bridge to our deepest happiness. What companion, human or animal, has shown you unexpected loyalty in your life? Have you ever discovered a connection that seemed too meaningful to be coincidence? Share your stories below. We'd love to hear about the bonds that have shaped your journey.